is up, everybody? Welcome to another episode of Limited Resources. This is episode number 719. My name is Marshall. I'm one of your Limited Resources, and joining me on the line all the way from Denver, Colorado, it's Luis Scott-Vargas. Luis, I don't get to say this to you very often, but good morning.
Good morning. Yeah, I dragged you out of bed at 9 a.m. to record the podcast because my parents are visiting, so I want to be a good host.
But we've got a good one this week. We've got one of our Q&A episodes, which we didn't get to do for the last cycle, so I'm excited to get into this. Our patrons always ask us awesome questions. And by the way, that is how you can ask us the questions for the Q&A episode, is if you're a patron. We put up a post in our Patreon feed. It's just where we can post, ask questions, talk to our patrons directly, and anybody who's a patron of the show gets access to it. And we'll put it up where you can ask questions. And for these Q&A episodes, it's very open. You can ask questions about anything. Sometimes people ask questions about magic or strategy, but this can be about anything you want. Life stuff, bigger picture stuff, anything. Food, cooking, pop culture, advice, like whatever you need. We're gonna give it our best shot in the Q&A episode. And we did want to say thank you very much to all of our patrons who support us and who ask us questions on the show this week. We're going to skip the Crack-A-Pack because we want to get to as many of these things as possible. So let's just jump right in, Luis. Our first one is from Daniel, who says, I'm a pretty strict vegetarian and could use some extra flavor in my life. I'm interested in your thoughts on sauces. What are your go-to sauces and what makes a good sauce? This is good. Start off with a food question.
I do like sauce. So it kind of depends on your spice tolerance. I do a lot of spicy things because I really like spicy food. I actually just pickled a bunch of jalapenos. I made. I used Carolina Reapers, jalapenos, and garlic, and then pickled them in a little bit of brine. Just quick pickling and put them in the fridge. And put them on some eggs this morning. That's
awesome.
But in terms of sauces, there's tons of different kinds of hot sauce that are always good. I'm a pretty big fan of garlic too, so it's pretty easy to make here's a salad dressing. I actually make a ton. I made it like 2 days ago. I just mince garlic really finely, mix in some lemon juice, some olive oil, and then a little bit of salt and pepper, and that's it. That's just a good salad dressing. Like you don't have to go much more complicated than that. I think one of the things people kind of erroneously think about cooking is that good food has to be complicated, because restaurants tend to go a little more overboard because you're out there. They're trying to be like, hey, let's do something you can't get at home or whatever.
Right.
Most of the time, you can make really good stuff with not very many ingredients. We had a ton of tomatoes in the garden, so I made marinara the other day, and it was just tomatoes, garlic, olive oil, basil, salt, and pepper, and that was it. That was the only ingredients, and it's just not. It doesn't take a whole lot of the ingredient list doesn't need to be long to make something good. So, I would say that the core kind of bases I like for flavoring is I like citrus, like lemon, lime. I like garlic, and then often you're going to want some kind of fat, whether it's butter or olive oil. I try to stay away from canola oil or seed oils and stuff. I think most people at this point, or a lot of people who care about that stuff, have kind of come to the conclusion those things aren't great for you. And kind of past that, there's a lot of seasonings you can do. I think my most common spices used besides salt and pepper, of course, are paprika, chili powder, and crushed red pepper. And then, of course, it gets spicier from there. But I was a vegetarian for about a year in college, mostly just to see if I could, not any deep philosophical reason. And yeah, sauces go a long way, but that's true even if you aren't.
Yeah, one of the things that I really like to look for when it comes to getting food to taste better are not just sauces, but also some of the stuff that you mentioned, herbs, spices, and peppers and stuff like that, because those are kind of cheat codes, when you're cognizant of what you're putting into your body, you start looking into it, you sort of find it. There's a few things, that you can kind of basically have as much as you want of on stuff that really does make it taste better, but isn't because you know how it is. It's basically everything that tastes really good is either not great for you or has kind of a limit to how much you want to use of it. But there are a few that aren't. And one of the ones, or maybe it's a grouping, are those, is it Flatiron Pepper Company?
Yeah. I didn't I send you some of those?
You did. Yeah. That's why I brought it up. You sent me like a pack that had like 4 or 5 of them, and it's amazing just what like a good high quality ingredient like that can do. And basically it's a company that dries out peppers and makes them into pepper flake like you would get at the grocery store, but it's like higher quality, and they do a bunch of different combinations. So you can, one of them is called sweet heat, right? And it has kind of a combination of heat, but a little bit on the sweeter side, peppers. But that's just an example. There's 5 or 10 or something that they make, but like none of those, like you can just like use as much as you tolerate, like there's no limit to those. And there's also herb spices that are similar too, that aren't based on salt. I love salt. I use salt all the time. I'm not saying you shouldn't, but I'm saying there are a few herb blends that you can get that aren't salt based, and you can kind of just go ham with those too.
Yeah, the Flatiron did such a good job that I sent like sample packs to like 3 or 4 different people, because you might. And honestly, the one I use the most is just straight up the crushed red pepper, which you might think like, yeah, crushed red pepper, you buy it, at Costco for $4 in a giant thing or whatever. You get it at every Italian place that's been sitting there for months in the same little shaker. But these are just so much higher quality that I noticed such a big difference that I wanted to evangelize it to my friends, because that's kind of what I tend to do.
Yeah, you like to share when you find something cool. But anyway, I think that's I know it's not technically a sauce, but that's the kind of stuff that can really up the flavor of the food that you're eating, and you don't have to feel bad about it. You don't have to like go, well, I probably shouldn't use too much of this, right? Because again, we want to be healthy within reason, but I mean, that means eating good stuff, but you want to find those little spots where you can kind of use however much you want. Are you a sriracha guy?
Well, not anymore, because it's off the market.
Impossible to find. Yeah. Yeah, it still technically exists, but they just haven't been able to produce it in quantity, so it's been really hard to find. But when it is around, do you like it?
Yeah, I like sriracha, though. They do a little a bit of a cheat, because the serving size is low enough. They're able to say it has no calories in it, but that's just not true. Like you look at the ingredients, there's sugar in it. So like, but they're able to claim, because of rounding, it's like, well, each serving is this bit small and has so few calories that we're allowed to call it 0 or whatever. And it's just like, well, that's not entirely true.
Not quite true, but if it rounds to like 0, it's probably pretty good. Yeah, and the other ones I like are vinegar based hot sauces. Like Frank's Red Hot or Crystal. Those are, you can go pretty crazy with those, and they add a ton of flavor to whatever it is that you're putting in Tabasco, that kind of stuff. Another question also from Daniel says, I noticed you guys are really consistent with keeping your language and humor clean across all your different projects. I was wondering if this is to make your content more accessible, a desire to keep it classy in general, or something else. Online discourse can get pretty wild. I'm curious why you eschew that trend. Yeah, that is why, Daniel. Way back when we first started the podcast with Ryan and I, we put it on the table. Should we speak how we do in real life, where there's some swearing in there? Should we ratchet that up? I mean, at the time, this was so long ago that it was like popular on the radio, not swearing because they weren't allowed to, but for, these radio hosts to like try to, like actively try to be incendiary, to like shock jock or whatever, right? To try to like get,
the Howard Sterns of the world.
Right. And, so that was the thing. And then there was the other end of the spectrum, which was, maybe we should keep it clean. And that is what happened. We decided to keep it clean because of what you said. We wanted to keep it open, mainly for younger listeners, right? We didn't want somebody who's, getting into magic, 12 or 13 or something like that, to have our podcasts on and their parents are like, what do you like, these guys are just going crazy swearing and stuff like that. Because in real life, Luis and I we do swear like a decent amount. And some people are like,
speak for yourself there, buddy.
Oh yeah, you're just a chaste. But I mean, we don't, we're not like crazy, we're not like BDM levels, but like we're up there. We kind of let it fly. But, when it comes to the podcast and the other stuff I do as well, we try to keep it really straightforward. I mean, it's just a decision you have to make about your audience, basically. And there's a lot of people who find that, not very tasteful. And so we decided just to leave it off of the content so that it could be opened up to as many people as possible. Nathan Fleming, Flavor Judge, says, Genius or Grifter, I'm playing original Innistrad draft and there's an important flashback card in my opponent's graveyard. Their graveyard is spread out so you can see the names of each card. I ask to see the graveyard and my opponent hands it over while thinking about their turn. I look briefly and hand it back in a single stack. My opponent puts it back on the table without spreading it out, concealing the crucial flashback spell, and I go on to win, likely due to the missed card. Can't say I'm proud of this one. Love the show, and I accept any judgment you give.
Sorry, go over what the start of that again.
So Nathan was playing original Innistrad, which had flashback as a mechanic, right. And their opponent had the cards spread out so that you could see at least the name of each card. But Nathan said, hey, can I take a look at your graveyard, and handed it back in a single pile, which the opponent then set back down in a single pile. And Nathan's assuming then proceeded to forget about the flashback card because they couldn't see it and never cast the flashback card from the graveyard.
Right. Well, ultimately the responsibility is on the opponent to know what's in your own graveyard and educate your graveyard as such. I wouldn't, if I asked you my opponent's graveyard and they handed it to me, I wouldn't like spread it out before handing it to them. I would probably also hand it back to them in a single pile. It's their business what they do with it. That being said, Nathan said he's not proud of it. Like, if you were trying to conceal it, then you are in fact doing something that is not great. Like, I would call this more grifter than genius. Like,
I would too. Again, it's definitely not outside of the rules, which of course is why it makes for a good genius or grifter. But I guess I am curious what the intent was. Like, is this one of those things where you're like, well, maybe if I put this card on the bottom and pile it up high, then they'll forget about it? Or is this just like, I just happen to hand it back because it's easier to hand back cards that's just kind of how you hand back cards, is in a single pile. And then my opponent just spaced on it and never revisited. It sounds like it's a little bit more towards that, but yeah, I mean, use your moral compass, right? If you felt kind of weird about it, maybe not.
This is what we're here to provide, the moral compass. So
that is true. That's our main goal.
because we never swear or think impure thoughts. That's why we're
right. You can listen to the podcast and
I mean, to add to that, by the way, because I realized I didn't really weigh in. Yeah, I think that just in general, erring on the side of being more inclusive is just better. Like, there's just there's no downside and there's like a lot of upside. So I don't really see a reason to go nuts with profanity or whatever. It's just not that interesting. Like, I swear plenty in my life. That is, I was joking before when I said I didn't, obviously, but I don't find it to be like core to my ability to be understood or anything like that.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I think when I was younger, I embraced it a little more, but now I'm kind of like, I could take it or leave it. It's just, sometimes it helps to accentuate things. Next is from Jeremy, who says, hey guys, next one's from Shivam, who says, did you like the peanuts? And that's because he brought me a bag of these awesome kind of spiced peanuts that he's got. And I'll tell you, I haven't eaten them yet. I actually escaped Las Vegas with them fully intact, which has never happened because I always open them up. He's brought them to me multiple times before, and I'll open them up when we're backstage for coverage. And then, hey, what do you got there? And then the next thing you know, they're gone because they're kind of addicting. They're spicy. You'd actually really like them, Luis, as well. And this time I've actually managed to get them home. And so I'm kind of saving them. So thanks again for that, Shivam. I appreciate it. Next is from Jeremy, who says, hey guys, I've been wondering what the next one of these would be. These are my favorite episodes. Awesome. So I know you guys both really like The Wire. I finally broke down and got Max and have started off with that show, and I'm about halfway through season 2. I'm really enjoying it, but curious why you guys love it so much.
I think for me, it's that every character is just so very much a fully fleshed out character. I mean, not like literally every single one. There's characters who have very little screen time or whatever, but like every character you see for any extended period of time acts like a human being who is multifaceted, makes decisions that sometimes make no sense, because humans also make decisions that make no sense. Like that actually, I don't think is a downside. And I think overall, basically, it's got a combination of great storytelling, because like, I mean, it's an interesting story, but I wouldn't even say that's the best part. I think the best part is all like, think of, I don't know, you like watching clips on YouTube, right? Like I know that you're a fan. Think of all the clips you watch on YouTube with The Wire. How many have to do with the overall plot? Not very many. It's things like
they're little vignettes into a character. Yeah.
Right. It's things like Marlowe talking to the convenience store guard, like you want it to be one way, but it's the other way, you know? Like it's things like in and there's not really any spoilers here. The show isn't even like the kind of show that you could get wildly spoiled on, and it's literally, I think, 20 years old. But you know, like one of my favorite scenes is in the courtroom. Stringer, you know, not Stringer Bell. Omar is testifying against a different gangster, and the defense lawyer for the gangster was like, so you take your shotgun and you prey on the members of this community, and Omar says to the lawyer who's defending a gangster, I got my shotgun, you got your briefcase, it's all in the game. And
it's
like
all in the game.
And it's just like, yeah, like there's just so many little scenes that paint such a awesome picture of like kind of who these characters are, what their motivations are, why they do the things they do. And it's not a like a cheery show. It's like it's actually like a pretty grim show in a lot of ways. But it is my favorite show of all time. And I don't know. I've rewatched it twice, so I've watched it 3 times, and I probably will watch it again at some point here.
Yeah, it's similar reasons for me. The thing that really hooked me on it is that it's a slow burn. You have to kind of get into it and just sort of exist in that space. And those are the movies and shows that I tend to go back to, are ones that create an environment that I wouldn't want to live in real life, but I want to visit. I want to be a part of. I want to see what's happening there. And if you look at the way that the characters develop over time, they develop in a very real way. And, there's a tendency for TV shows to feel a compulsion to make their characters fit an archetype at some point, right? You watch a TV show and it's, well, who's the bad guy? Who's the good guy? You just start, like, we're just trained after having consumed media our whole life to kind of just start to suss out who the protagonist is, who the antagonist is, what's the thing that's going to happen to the good guy that makes it so that, and that stuff just doesn't really exist in The Wire. People carry forward in a more realistic way that mirrors real life, where it's like things happen and us as human beings who are still here have to figure out how to move forward and carry on. They do that, but there's just, people are acting in their own best interest for the most part on the show, and it's not out of some need to serve evil. Right. Even the people that do things that are, would definitely, that are illegal or immoral or combination of them, they're not doing it because they're a bad guy. They're doing it because they need money, or they have a motivation outside of, whatever it is that they're doing to take care of themselves or somebody, or, and there are people who are, power hungry, but there are people in real life who will do whatever they can do to try to get to the top of a system or a scheme or a whatever, and if you look, there's people that go up in there and sometimes they die, sometimes they don't. And then there's people also that like get off the rails and they go into a totally different thing. And, to me, that is dedicated writing. That's the type of writing. It's so easy for those writers to start off that way. How many shows have you seen where you're like, hey, there's a lot of cool characters. I wonder where this is going to go. And then like by season 3, it's like, all right, that's the bad guy. That's the good guy. And you just have people just acting like nobody you've ever met in your real life, ever. Right. Ever. Somebody who's just, scheming and doing all this crazy stuff. And The Wire sidestepped that almost entirely, and they they did 5 seasons, and, you can kind of go end to end on it. Jeremy also asked if we've seen Peaky Blinder.
I have seen some of that. That's with Cillian Murphy. It's about gangsters in in London, in the 18 somethings. Not as good as The Wire, but it is good.
Okay. Yeah, maybe I'll check that out. Jeremy also says, speaking of shows, my Magic-related question is, what would you guys think of a docu-series style show that covered the history of organized play? I've always been interested in the Pro Tour and coverage and how they grew from those roots of the days of Mike Justice, Mike Long to what it is today. And then he also says, I hope you guys are doing well. Thanks for all your hard work. Shout out to producer Jeff as well. P.S. I love the YouTube channel, Luis. You are my daily lunch break companion.
Nice.
That's really nice. I mean, I would absolutely love to see a documentary about organized play going from the very beginnings to kind of where it ended up and even, where it is today. But I mean, you need the footage. Like, I don't think there's been any, I mean, there's disparate footage of things and, coverage and stuff. But to make a docu-series like that, you need somebody who took a camera and went along for that ride. And I don't think that exists. There's some of it. I've seen, bits you could get like a vignette, but would you watch that, Luis? I'm sure you would.
Yeah, I would.
Yeah.
I would break my no videos rule for that.
Joe says, how much better than an on-color playable does a splash card need to be? Any advice on evaluating when splashing is worth the hit to the mana base?
Splash cards, assuming you don't have great fixing, but you have a little bit, you generally should not splash a card off no fixing. If you're playing blue-black and you have no fixing, you should not be I'm going to put 3 mountains in my deck to play a red card, right? So, but let's say you have some fixing, but it's not free. Mm-hmm. You have, let's say in this format, a Prophetic Prism and an Evolving Wild. So you're okay, my blue-white deck could splash a red card. You would want that card to be in the top, 5 cards in your deck-ish range. Or to be doing something your deck really needs, a white blue is actually a good example. You're more likely to want to splash a Torch the Tower sort of card, a deal, some sort of deal 3 in your blue white deck because it doesn't maybe have access to good removal. Whereas your black red removal deck isn't really going to splash a pacifism. That doesn't really make sense. So generally when I look for splashes, it's something really strong.
Yeah, I feel the same way, either filling a gap or doing something that's one of your best cards. Otherwise, it's almost always better to be disciplined and keep your mana base strong. In one way you can think about it is when your mana base goes wrong, when you draw the wrong lands at the wrong time, you could turn off 3 or 4 cards in your hand versus just the one that you may be able to cast. It has to be that good, right? The other thing that to keep in mind when it comes to splashing and figuring out if it's worth it or not is how situational the card is. If a card gets better into the late game, is very flexible, is good anytime you cast it, can kill anything on board, can draw you cards, do whatever the thing that you're trying to fill that is, then it is more likely to be a good splash than one that is like a counter spell or something that you need at a very specific time in the game. Sigmund says, hey, Marshall and Luis, I remember hearing about data that suggests better limited players are more likely on average to pivot off their pack 1, pick 1 in a given draft. This is something I want to improve on, but I find myself falling into the same trap of making suboptimal choices to allow me to play my first pick time and time again. What advice can you give to help me be more aware of alternate paths when drafting the rest of pack 1 so I don't follow my first pick too far off the rails? Thank you very much. I'm a huge fan of the show and really look forward to listening every week. Thank you, Sigmund. Great question.
So I think one of the ways that I have told people to look at this is a common kind of temptation is, right, you first pick a white card and then you second pick a white card and then you take 3 red cards and then 6th pick, there's a really good black card and a mediocre white or red card. Let's even say white card. It's pretty tempting to look and be well, how good is this one new black card versus the 2 white cards I have? And that's not actually the correct comparison because getting a 6th pick good black card, let's say a Candy Grapple, implies there's more coming. You're not comparing these 2 first picks your first and second pick versus your sixth pick, and thinking like, well, because like one way to look at it late in the draft is like, let's say you have two different potential splashes. You're like, well, which one gives me better cards? Sure. But when it comes to getting a late signal, look at a late signal as telling you, hey, there's going to be more of this coming. And that might not be the case. Maybe you take the candy grapple there, and then the next pick, there's a good white card, and you're like, all right, I'm going to kind of pivot back in. But a lot of times what you want to do is you want to take that candy grapple there, because the fact that there's a candy grapple there 6 kind of implies like a hopeless nightmare is maybe coming 7th, or some other like pretty decent black card. Because why is that there 6 if people weren't taking other cards over it? Yes, of course there could always be a pack with 5 black cards, and that could explain it. But for the most part, you should kind of weight the value of each card by how late you got it. So pick one pack wanting a white card means give you absolutely zero information about what the people around you are doing. No one else saw the pack. There was no information. Getting past a good card pick 2, not that much information, because they could always have just taken a rare, right? If you see the rares missing, it's like they could pass you the best uncommon in the set and have taken a rare of the same color over it. Pick 3, though, now it's like, well, if I'm seeing a good black card pick 3, that means something, because like people had to take 2 cards. Pick 4, even more. Pick 5, if you see a great card pick 5, that usually means people aren't in those colors. But like it means whoever opened the pack took a rare or some other high good value card over it. The next person took a card because they had already taken a white card, so they took a slightly worse white card over it. The third person's blue-green at this point. They've taken a blue card and a green card, and then they don't want to take this black card. And then you get a first pickable quality card, 4th pick, and you can actually look at that and think, oh, okay, so this actually could be open. So definitely keep in mind that the later something goes, the more likely it is that they're giving you actual, like, real information.
Yeah, there's a mirror of that concept in poker called implied odds. And the way that poker works fundamentally when you're playing it is that you are to think of every betting action as a straight up bet that you have to decide if you're willing to take or not. So, for example, the way poker works is, you're dealt 2 cards, and then there's a betting round, and then there's 3 cards in the middle and a betting round, then another card in a betting round, and then a final card in a betting round. So that's a lot of different betting rounds. But any prior betting round is, sunk costs, water under the bridge. Like you don't factor in, well, I've already put in this much money, right? That's just sunk cost fallacy. You just look at it on its surface with the new information of the card. And what can happen a lot of times is a card will come, and then somebody will bet, like let's say it's you versus just one opponent. They will bet, and you have to make a decision on whether you'd like to call or not. And you erase everything that you had done betting wise prior, because that money's in the pot. And you can't get it back, unless you win it. And you make a simple ratio, an odds calculation, right? So, let's say there's $200 in there, and your opponent bets $100. That's $300 that you stand to win. And in order for you to win it, you're going to have to risk the $100 bet. And so that is a straightforward betting calculation that you need to try to understand what your hand strength is versus what you think that their hand strength is. And you can use different methods to do that. But when it comes up, interestingly, in the same line that you're talking about here, Luis, with like the candy grapple example, where you're saying it isn't just the candy grapple that you're weighing, it's any future black cards that you may be able to get. That's the decision you're actually making. If you've got multiple data points that say black is open, I should switch into black, and you get a 6-pick candy grapple, there's a big sign that says there's more where this came from. And in poker, it's similar, where you can look at it and say, okay, I'm getting 3-1. There was 200. The other guy bet 100. Now I've got to put in my 100. So there's 3 of theirs to 1 of mine in order for me to win this pot. But there's another round of betting to come. And you may feel that you're in a situation where if you were to make your hand, you would get the rest of your opponent's money. And that could be a lot. That could be way more than what's sitting in front of you right now. Maybe the person's playing completely crazy, or maybe you're drawing to a hand that if you make it will be the strongest hand possible, meaning you can't lose. And maybe you think your opponent is very, very likely to put in all the money, even if you were to make that hand. So you have to think about it in terms of not just I stand to win the money that's in front of me, but I could win the money that's in front plus the money that my opponent has left over, right? There's this implication, and that's why they call it implied odds. It's not direct odds. You're not guaranteed, but if you have a situation on your hands where you feel that that's going to happen, you have to factor that in. And it's the same thing with the candy grapple. You have to say, I would love to just straight up have the candy grapple, but that may not be worth it on it to take one card that's off color, even if it's a very good one. But it could definitely be worth it if you get 2 more packs plus the rest of this pack of black cards that are coming as well. So Try to frame it that way, Sigmund, and see if it helps you out. Keep the bigger picture in mind, and don't make up your mind early. Don't look at it and go, well, I am red black. You are not. It is only pack 1, pick 4. You are not any 2 particular set of colors just yet. You are more likely to be that color pair than any other, but there are other color pairs, and you may end up dipping into those. The other trap that I find that mid-level players fall into a lot is they take a very strong, let's say they take a double white card, 2 double white, blah, blah, blah card, pack 1, pick 1. And then they make their way through, the wheel pack comes around, they've got 10 or 12, 9 or 10, whatever cards in their pile. And they've got a ton of red cards, and they have that one white card with maybe one other random white card. And they're like, well, I'm red white. And it's like, are you? Like, you are red. You may be in white if some things work, but a lot of times you open up a pack, take it, and that color's not open, but you just assume that you're going to be in that. And you should be very aware that going into pack 2, you should be very open to going into whatever color it presents itself to you. If it's white, great. You get to play your sweet rare, but you don't have to stick with it. That was a good question, Sigmund. Thank you for that. Mike says, I just listened to the great interview of Kai Bude on the Humans of Magic podcast. I really enjoyed it. And James, too, is a great interviewer, but he's so polite that he doesn't always draw out the funniest war stories. So I wanted to ask you both, given your personal history with the Titans of Magic, what is a really tough question that you would like to ask one of the Magic luminaries that would really put them on the spot? And are there any good stories about Kai or anyone else you haven't told before because it might be embarrassing at the time, but where maybe the time has come to let the cat out of the bag? That's great. And yeah, you can check out the Humans of Magic podcast with James. I've been on that show, and I believe I'll be going on it again as well. We've been chatting about it. And he interviews all types of people in the Magic community, not just one type. He's got content creators, professional players, people that worked at Wizards, everybody over there. So if you're wanting to kind of get more personal with people in the community, that's a great place to go. I know one question that I still don't know if the cat's out of the bag or whatever. This isn't for Kai specifically, but I always want to hear about when testing teams go wrong. Like when things go off the rails, and specifically, I don't just mean like the drama of like, oh, this person doesn't like this person, or they got into a fight or whatever. But I really like it when things get awkward in terms of like, hey, your sideboard looks pretty well set up to beat our deck. Interesting. I wonder how that, what made you pick that card? I wonder, right? Because especially in smaller field tournaments, if, we've had world championship events that were 24 players and there's testing teams of 4 or 5 people. If you're one of them and you think that you're on the team that has especially if you think that they have the best deck and all that, I mean, it would be pretty handy to be prepared to beat your teammates, but there's kind of an unspoken, rule. I don't know how to, actually, is it unspoken? It feels like there's an unspoken rule that says don't do that, but I mean, you're allowed to.
Well, sometimes it benefits from being spoken because I know exactly the worlds that you were thinking about here. It was a 16 player worlds. This is like 2013. Shahar won it, which doesn't narrow it down too much. But this one, I wasn't. This was actually the first event I did full coverage for. I was not playing in this Worlds, but Team CFB had a 4-person team of Ifro, Raptor, Kibler, and Webb, David Ochoa, and Raptor had built this black-green Jund deck. So it was like traditional Jund and modern, but it cut the red. It's straight black-green. It's Golgari, actually. Mm-hmm. And the way this deck worked was just like, Liliana, Thoughtseize, Duress, all Tarmogoyf, all that sort of thing, but just no red cards. They decided they didn't really care for Lightning Bolt, Bloodbraid Elf, and having better mana and getting to play some good colorless lands, all that stuff, right? Mm-hmm. Well, Kibler was going to play green-white already. And, Kibler ended up with 4 Mirran Crusaders, or maybe 3, I don't remember, but I think it was a lot. I know it was more than 2 in his sideboard. And they were like, Kibler, what the hell? And he's like, I think Mirran Crusader is really good in this field. And they're like, yeah, of course you do. We're all playing black-green. He's like, no, I think Jund's just the best deck. And he's like, yeah, but Jund has lightning bolts. Like, Mirran Crusader's not good against Jund. It's good against black-green. And he's like, And so then they had to put infests in their sideboard to deal with Kibler, which is horrendous value because now you're like both sideboarding against each other, but it's a 16-person tournament.
Yeah.
And then Raptor, playing for top 4 of Worlds, played against Craig Wesko, who was playing White Weenie, and he had infests in his sideboard and just trounced him with infests. But, I mean, it's funny. I actually literally made fun of Kibler about this on Twitter just like the other day. Like, mm-hmm. It is something that we talk about. Like, we people even call it Kiblering. Like, yeah, I got Kiblered. Mm-hmm. It's, look, He chose to put the Mirran Crusaders in. We get to make fun of him for it. I think it's all legit. And to be fair to Kibler, this is the sort of thing that I've seen happen in testing teams a lot. I remember for PT Theros, this is the one that Chapin won, or Born of the Gods rather, the one with like everyone was playing like Sultai with Sylvan Caryatid, Courser of Krufix, like all that sort of thing. Mm-hmm. The Pantheon team, I wasn't on this team. This is like the Huey, Owen, Reed, Finkel, Martel, all those guys. They were playing, and at some point people realized that I don't even remember the name of the card. It was the 3 blue-black sorcery where you look at their hand and graveyard and exile a card, and then you can cast that card. Like, oh yeah, Psychic something or other, I'm sure.
Yeah.
Not a good card, but actually really good in the mirror. And the numbers on those started like creeping up because they were all playing the deck, and until they had to get to a point where they're like, we need to stop. This is just hurting the team. So that is a common thing where testing kind of goes wrong, even though it's not like these are instances of like huge disasters. It is just funny that sometimes you can end up in a spot where, look, it's the sort of thing where when you are testing your deck against the people in the testing house and they're all playing black-green Jund, it's pretty easy to justify to yourself why you should put Mirran Crusader in your sideboard, or even just like, everyone's playing Ramp and you're playing, Delver, and you're just like, I think Disdainful Stroke is going to be really good in this metagame. And it's like, I don't even think a lot of the times these people are trying to get an edge on their team. You look at the decks your team's playing and you assume other people in the field are coming to similar conclusions. It actually does make some sense. It is just funny how that can play out sometimes.
Yeah. And I mean, the thing to me is that there needs to be clarity, right? What is a natural, like, let's say, because like these tournaments were weird, like that one you're talking about with Kibble, 16-player tournament, those just didn't happen, right? Like, You're on a team that represents a quarter of the entire field. Like, what do you, these are your competitors. Ultimately, you're putting your brains together, but this isn't a team event. So like, what are you supposed to, how are you supposed to act in that scenario?
There's a couple of ways. One is for a 16-player field, you shouldn't test with 4 people. That's actually too much of the field, because then you start getting into the point where like it becomes hard not to make that kind of decision. Yeah. The other is that you need to try to get data from a bunch of different sources and not just, hey, the people around me, because you'll end up getting a kind of a skewed view, like we saw, of what exactly is going on and what people are going to be doing. But it is difficult. It's hard to ignore the things right in front of you. It's hard to ignore, like, it's kind of like, I'm going to test. Let's go back to the Ramp example. Actually, At that Pro Tour, Kibler was testing red-green mid-range, and he couldn't beat the team's ramp deck. He tried. He couldn't.
Mm-hmm.
So then he played the ramp deck, and then he won the Pro Tour, which was awesome. Like, he was on our team. He beat Paulo in the finals. Our team had, 1 and 2. Finkel makes an appearance here. His legendary failure to attack or to account for the wolf that Kibler had, to not block the wolf and to die to a galvanic blast or whatever, was a pretty big part of that too.
Double galvanic blast or triple or something weird. Yeah.
Yeah. But in that case, it's like you're testing your deck against the deck that your team's playing. And at some point in the process, you've seen this, Marshall, you've been kind of embedded into the team things.
Yeah.
At some point late enough people want to play a deck that they just want to play that deck against other things. They're not spending a ton of, you've decided you're playing ramp. You're not spending a ton of time testing blue-black control against random decks because you're not playing it.
Right.
So you end up in a spot where you're just playing against these same decks a lot, and you're just like, well, I'm not beating this deck. I guess we're a 12-person team. If I play a deck composed of the best players, I mean, this was Kibler's logic. He even liked his mid-range deck, but he's like, there's going to be 11 or 12 great players playing this ramp deck that I can't beat. Like, probably shouldn't play this in the Pro Tour. I won't be able to win the Pro Tour. Right. And then he did win the Pro Tour by playing the ramp deck. So that was a good move. But I don't know. It's tricky, right? Like I mean, it's just hard to figure out how to use data. Everyone struggles with that.
Yeah, I think that, there just needs to be clarity. And like you said, this was a little Wild West just because there weren't so many tournaments around especially for those stakes with so few players, So I don't know. I never really felt any emotions about it. I just thought, they should have been made very clear about what the expectations were. And since it wasn't, it was kind of like, well, you do what you got to do. I mean, because let's not forget that if somebody does that, if they put in a card that's specific to that matchup, they're placing an even bigger bet on what the team came up with, right? I mean, they're saying not only do we think we have the best deck, but also I'm going to triple down and say, and I need to be able to beat the best deck. I mean, if you're wrong, it's an absolute disaster, right? Like, you can't beat anybody with the deck you have, and your sideboard isn't relevant against players who are winning. So it's there are costs to that as well. Thanks for the question, Mike. Next one is from Weston, who says, hi, Marshall and Luis. What's the most unexpected or creative play you've ever made in a tournament that led to a victory? And what was the key decision-making process behind it?
Ooh, that's hard. I make a lot of really weird plays.
Yeah. I mean, I've seen you do so many crazy things that just other people didn't see. Yeah. Do you have an example?
It is wild. So this is Grand Prix San Francisco, which was in downtown San Jose. This was Time Spiral Block Construct, and I was playing a Mystical Teachings deck, which was like a 5-color, blue-black based 5-color control deck with Mystical Teachings, which is a 3 and a blue instant. Search your library for an instant or creature with flash, put it in your hand. Flashback 5 and a black, which sounds ridiculous, but was actually just a dominant card both in block and standard, because Magic used to be like that, where you could spend 4 mana to get a card, then 6 mana to get a card, and that was actually good.
And do nothing else, yeah.
I'm playing against an opponent who's playing blue-green aggro, which is one of the more popular decks in the field because it was supposed to be good against this deck, right? And I have a Begarden Hellkite in play. It's a 5/5 flyer. At this point, I've basically stabilized the board, because when you play a Hellkite, it deals 5 damage divided as you choose, and I like it to wipe their board. And the one thing I was worried about losing to was a pair of Psionic Blasts. 2 and a blue instant, it's char. It's deal 4 to any target, you take 2. And that deck played 4 of those. And so I'm like, okay, well, the only way I lose this game, because at this point I had like a bunch of removal spells in hand, they're not ever getting a damage through with creatures, is a bunch of Psionic Blasts. I had a Tendrils of Corruption in my hand. It's 3 and a black instant, deal X to any creature, gain X life, X the number of swamps you control, and you have Urborg, so all your lands are swamps. So I attack them with Hellkite, and before damage, I Tendrils my own Hellkite.
Whoa. So
the reason I did that was they played a card called Stonewood Invocation. It's 3 and a green, split second. You can't respond to it. Give a creature +5/+5 and hexproof. Or Shroud, actually, at the time. My thought process was, the only way I lose is double Psionic Blast.
Mm-hmm.
If I land a Tendrils, they can never kill me. I'm going to gain 11 life, right? I will never, and still have tons of removal in hand. the way they can stop a tendrils from resolving is casting Stoner Invocation on my 5/5. So,
but it gives it +5/+5, you said?
And it gives it +5/+5. By doing it before damage, if they have Stonewood, I cut my clock by a turn because they take 10 this turn and they're at like 15.
Mm-hmm.
If they don't have Stonewood, I don't do damage, but who cares? I've gained 11 life. I have a bunch of removal. I can never lose. My opponent looked at me really weird, didn't have the Stonewood, but like that was, I think, still the correct play. And it's a play that I think like basically very few people other than myself would actually do.
Yeah, that's
like
incredible.
I thought that was a cool play, and I still think it's right.
That is awesome. Yeah. I don't know. I don't have any like tournament winning. I've come up with a few okay lines, but I mean, come on, I got Luis on the show. Like, next comes.
That was a good line. Yeah, I agree.
Yeah, thank you. That was my most creative line I could come up with. Blaze says, "Hello, Marshall and Luis. Love the show and appreciate all you guys do. Thank you. I often think back to the times that got me into the game, and I'm curious, what was your "this is the game for me" moment? Reversely, what was the time in Magic that you're glad we have moved on from? For me, you know, it was after I had started playing poker, and then Ryan showed me limited. You know, that was it. I mean, you know, when I first started to draft, I was like, oh, okay, I get it. And then, you know, it really clicked for me that this had that multi-dimensional aspect to it, where you had the draft, which was a certain skill, and then you had deck building, which it really at the time, it still carried on, but really at the time it was a learning curve thing that I had to like figure out how to build these decks and do them properly. You know, weighing my risks and all that. And then of course, playing out the games, which has always been my favorite part. I know most people's favorite part of draft is the actual draft, but I actually really like playing games, and putting those three things together in a way that I could do that in an hour or two and then do that over and over again was it for me. The part that we've moved on from, actually, Luis brought it up just now on one of the last questions. To me, one of my most hated eras of the Pro Tour was the era where everybody had Thoughtseize and Courser of Crufix. And this was this horrible combination of cards that everybody would know everybody else's cards from turn one because of Thoughtseize. And then they would play a Courser of Crufix, which would reveal the top card of the library to both players. So everybody knew what everybody was drawing. And it slowed everything down because Magic is meant to be a game of imperfect information. It's not chess. It is supposed to be that you don't, at least most of the time, know what's going on in your opponent's hand, and you don't know what they've drawn off the top of their library. And also, the player doesn't know what they're about to draw off the top of their library. These are absolutely crucial parts of what makes Magic interesting and sets it apart from, you know, what we'd call like a pure skill game or other card games that have tried to go down that road. And these two combinations of cards being as popular as they were at the time really brought Magic to much closer to that perfect information level than we've had. And it was horrible. I didn't like to play it. I didn't like to watch it, and I didn't like to cover it at the Pro Tour. So I'm glad we've moved on from that.
I think that they largely solved that with Courser type cards by making it so you just can look at the top card. It's not revealed, because that was really bad.
It was really, really bad. What was the moment when you got hooked?
I think for me, it was when the local store that I could walk to had a $2 tournament on Saturdays. Mm-hmm. And me and my friends joined, and none of us had good decks, and it didn't matter. And it was just super fun. And I remember just playing and thinking like, wow, this game is incredible. Like I love this game. You know, I don't want to stop playing.
Yeah. Is there any time in Magic that you're glad we've moved on from?
Yeah, the MPL. The MPL was just complete, just dog swallow. I think that
it was very frustrating time. Yeah.
It showed a really clear lack of understanding of the people making decisions about who tournament Magic is for. And they tried to make it for the Twitch viewer and the 32 players in the MPL. And I think a lot of what tournament Magic actually is for is the aspirational person going to a PTQ who wants to one day play on the Pro Tour and, you know, face me in a draft match or whatever, you know, and because I get mana screwed all the time. The MPL made it so there was no aspirations, but you could go watch these people play in tournaments. And it's like, no, that's actually not what Magic's about. I love Magic. I think it's fun to watch Magic. A lot of people do. I would not argue Magic's a more watchable game than League of Legends or basketball.
Right.
It's not. It's a more fun game to play because I think that like, I mean, I'm not going to say it's a more fun game to play because like all these games are fun to play, but it's a game that a lot of people have a lot of time. like a lot of what tournament Magic does to people is make them want to go out and play Magic. Whereas I don't know how true that is of watching, you know, the NBA for a lot of people, or NFL or League Worlds, because those athletes are doing something that are so clearly different from what you're doing. Magic's not quite like that. Like when LeBron James, you know, makes a sick, you know, assist or a dunk or whatever, when Tom Brady makes an awesome like throw, you don't imagine yourself doing those things. You even play basketball, and that's not the basketball you play.
No, I'm in awe of those things because I know how hard, like in the case of LeBron. Yeah.
When you watch Kai play a game of Magic, it kind of makes you think like, oh man, I want to shuffle up rhinos and go to the store and play.
Yes.
Because you can imagine yourself doing those things. It's actually less. It's funny. There's in some ways less of a gulf between the average person watching a game of Magic, like a tournament game of Magic, who's a competitive player, and like a pro. Than any of the other examples we've used, whereas you watch Faker play a game of League of Legends, you'd never in a million years do anything that he could do.
Right.
But on the other hand, there's also still a pretty big gap between skill levels. It's just less apparent. But
yeah, and that's the perfect spot for it to be.
You definitely. It rewards it at the high end while also making it such that you can imagine yourself doing it there, and the MPL took that away. It's like you can't imagine yourself doing it because there's no opportunities for you to do it.
Yeah. That's very well put. That sums up that era very, very nicely. People watch Magic so that they can understand and get the decks and the technology and the stuff to go do it themselves. And, you know, playing on the Pro Tour is a dream for so many players that it can actually happen, right? I mean, it absolutely, you know, look, maybe you're not quite good enough to like get on the PT and stay on it for a extended run. But I mean, I have multiple friends, WoE and other people who have played multiple Pro Tours, you know, and they got to play at the highest level. I mean, that's the dream, right? It is that in the NBA analogy that I could do something really well on a weekend and get to play with LeBron James, right? And like, that's ludicrous when it comes to sports, but it's not when it comes to Magic. And that's kind of what they should be, what they need to focus on. Luke says, hey guys, I've been listening for like 10 years. Thanks for the great show. And over the years, in the set reviews, I feel like I've noticed grades for removal going down and grades for strong creatures going up. True? Yeah, that is true, Luke. Yeah.
I mean, this is actually an example I used when filming a recent Cube video. If your Cube deck has all spells from the 90s and creatures from the last 3 years, you got a great deck.
You got a good deck. Yeah. Well, I wish we could get Circo or somebody to do like a cross-reference on successive deck versus your most likelihood to have spells from the 90s and creatures from like the 2020s. You know, that's where you want to be. Yeah, no, that is true. You know, I think that one of the biggest reasons for that, Luke, is because of Enter the Battlefield abilities becoming so prevalent. That sort of became the staple. Earlier creatures, that was actually not common. Creatures were expected to be good on board, but not to pay you back for having cast the card a la a spell just for being there. And whenever they printed one that was a good effect, it ended up being one of the better creatures, you know, Muldrifter, Mana War, you know, these were cards that were like huge players in their time. They'd be good now as well. But, you know, these Enter the Battlefield effects where you're effectively getting a spell attached to a creature are much more common than they were before, where again, creatures kind of had to just hold their own. And so when you enter that world, the idea of somebody saying, okay, I'm going to pay this mana, I'm going to get an effect, and I'm going to get a creature. And then me being on the other side saying, okay, I'm going to pay this mana to kill the creature, doesn't sound as appealing as when they say, I play a creature, it's really good, it's going to beat you up, it's going to be really good on board, but I can choose, okay, I'm going to use my removal spell on that one and kill it, but there's no harm. Like it's a 1-for-1 exchange. A lot of times creatures these days will give you a 2-for-1, but a lot of times it's fractional, right? It's like they get a percentage of a card or some amount of value out of it that sort of accrues over time, and that does erode at the strength of removal. So yeah, that's a good observation, Luke, and it is true for sure. Luke also says, I remember when Brian Wong was on, he occasionally would refer to what he called in best in slot in the set review, suggesting that this is the best creature you could have in that color for that mana value. I kind of miss it. Any interest in bringing it back, or are things too context dependent now? No, that still works. It's hard to pick those out. I mean, Brian was, you know, very special player and a very special host on here who, has that ability. Luis is there too. But that is oftentimes the question. It's a contextual question or answer in the sense of it gives you an idea for the ranking of a card, like a 17 lands. Like if you were to say, what's the best 2-drop white 2-drop at common, right? Then maybe you could figure that out by looking that up on there. And that's kind of what he was doing. What it doesn't do is tell you what to pick, because most of the time it won't be sitting next to the other 2-drop. Like that doesn't happen that often in draft. So it's kind of a narrow view on it, but I like that. We could definitely mention that if we feel strongly.
Yeah, I like it.
Yeah, that it's a thing. Nate says, I have really enjoyed Luis's daily vintage cube drafts. One thing I've noticed is that Luis consistently sings the praises of the aggressive decks, but seems to actively avoid going down that path in favor of combo or mid-range cards. Is that more personal preference, more that you feel you have a personal edge with the decks you draft, or other considerations? That's interesting. I've watched all your videos as well, Luis, and that is true that you've drafted more of the combo-y, 5-color-y kind of mid-range put stuff together decks lately. But I haven't felt that that's because you are avoiding aggressive decks. You do draft them, and before, when you first started the channel, you actually drafted them somewhat frequently. I just feel that you feel that you can win more with these decks.
Yes, I mean, I think
because you're playing.
One of the decks from 3 days ago was a Gruul aggro deck, right?
Yeah,
it's not so much that there is some amount of personal preference, but that's one of the coolest things, in my opinion, that the team draft like Discord server has led to. Was this is putting to the test something that we've wanted to see for a while. At least I have, and I know people in my chat have mentioned it when I've streamed. What do Cube look like when it's all good players trying to win? Because when you join a Cube draft league, you're going to have some amount of people who are just trying to draft the best deck they can. You're going to have some amount of people who want to force a certain deck. You have some people who want to do the goofiest thing possible. And that was obviously a lot of that time too. I mean, which is totally fine. That, you're achieving whatever goals you want to achieve. When I'm drafting a team draft, especially because I have teammates I'm responsible to, I'm not trying to screw around. Yeah. I am trying to draft the best deck I can draft. And sometimes that does mean I draft an aggressive deck. Sometimes it doesn't. I do think right now that the Tolarian Academy combo decks or the Flash combo decks are actually really good, which is part of the reason I draft them. The truth is I do like them a little more. I'd rather play a deck with Academy than a deck with Goblin Guide. That's not like some sort of big shocker. But I don't draft those decks just because I think they're more fun. I draft them because I think they're going to give me a good chance to win. And I do think aggro is good in this cube, and I think sometimes you should draft it. I'm a little bit more on a combo kick right now. This is true, but that's also just a good Academy deck beats a good aggro deck like every time almost, is what I found at least.
Yeah. I also think that you found a real sweet spot where there's enough cards that support that type of strategy that you're talking about. Yeah, there's some key cards like Academy and things like that you need to get. But man, I feel like you have a lot of wiggle room to sort of pick and choose what the packs give you and still come up with the combo pieces you want, plus the stuff to kind of smooth it out. And the secret sauce really to the way that you draft, the thing that you talk about, but people just overlook constantly. Nobody ever comments about it. Is your ability to build mana bases in the cube is awesome. Like your mana is good. You know when to divert a pick, even a strong card to a mana source. And if you just look at your mana bases, draft after draft after draft, they're functional. They work. You almost never miss or hang yourself out to dry with the mana. And that gives you that flexibility. Because, I mean, what would you say the average number of colors is that you're playing in these decks over the past few weeks, these mid-rangey combo decks? Is it 4?
Probably 4, 3 to 4. 3.5 maybe is the average. There's a rare time when you're just straight like blue-green. Those are the two most common colors, the way I've been drafting these. Mm-hmm. But
when you get Cradle and Academy.
Right. Exactly. That's the dream. Most of the time it's more like I'm blue-green, but I'm playing 1 white card and 2 black cards or something along those lines.
Yeah. Great question. Another one from Lucas says, hi again. Do you guys prefer playing in person paper Magic or on Arena? I much prefer in person, but I've heard someone saying that they think the Arena experience is more, quote, pure.
Well, I don't know about that. That sounds like nonsense to me. But
Yeah.
I prefer to play in person. All else being equal, it is much more convenient to play on Magic Online or Arena. So I do
Yeah.
95% of my games on that. Actually, probably more at this point in time. But I do think there's no substitute for paper Magic. It's harder to get together, but you know what? It's so worth it. Like, and I've actually been recently ordering cards for Cube so I can
Uh-oh.
get a in-person Cube day going. But yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, I actually do. It's weird because I don't want to be this person, but I do prefer playing on Magic Online or Arena at this point. Like the efficiency part is just, I don't know. It just feels like when you go to a pre-release or you play in paper that it's just so much shuffling and sitting around and just not actually playing.
No, that is true.
Yeah, when I present the deck and I keep, then I like playing in paper. But it's just like I also really like playing. Like I like getting in a bunch of games. So at this point, maybe the pandemic ruined me, but I'm happier and also interestingly more comfortable game wise playing in digital.
There's certainly some decks that also function a lot better in digital than they do in paper.
Our friend Nikolai Bola says, "Hey guys, one of the biggest mental level ups I've learned from Marshall was that as long as I knew I put in all the effort to prepare and tried my hardest, the outcome was much less important since I knew I had done everything I could. This has helped me deal with my own losses, but I'm wondering if you have any tips on how to help a friend feel better when they suffer a defeat. Applying the same strategy by saying things like you tried your best or there was nothing else you could have done always feels a bit lackluster to me. I know you've both had experience being at tournaments where your friends are doing well and then come up short. And in Marshall's case, you've had experience chatting with LSV after he's had some rough defeats. So I was wondering if you had any thoughts on the topic. Thanks, Nikolai. That's a really good question. And also I have to commend you. That's a very thoughtful question. Like you're looking out for your friends and you're actually putting some effort into thinking about it. A lot of people are just like, yeah, you lost. I don't know, whatever, but that's a nice thing for you to do. What do the pro Magic players like? I mean, losing is, part of the deal, right? It's just super cut. Like nobody wants to hear your story. Does it go in reverse too? Where like, you and I and Paul, we'll talk if you take a tough loss and you'll vent or we'll kind of go over it as, yeah, but as friends and as like, this is a safe space, right? You're in the trust tree. Like we don't, you know what I mean? We know, all the things. Like we know we don't need to tell you, hey man, you tried really hard, or you know what I mean? This is just a let it out kind of a thing. But when I'll say like, especially when paper Magic was kind of happening all the time, like, I don't know. Pros don't console each other much. It's kind of really like we know, like nobody really wants to hear your bad beat story. Nobody really, it's not that they don't care, but it's like you've all been through it so many times that it's very sufficient to say, how did your round go? I lost. Right? Like there's reasons for it. I feel that it was unjustified. I feel that, something really bad happened to me. But at some point you're like, I always feel like that when I lose, right? I always feel like somebody got lucky, or of course I got my worst matchup, or my deck failed me, or I made the mistake that I always make, or whatever. And it's just, I don't know, if you're a pro player, you just don't really want to hear it at some point, Go ahead.
Yeah. I think that like, basically, no, like you mentioned, none of the pros sit around, saying those things to each other. Like, oh man, yeah, you tried hard, or you'll get them next time. What we tend to focus on is, okay, what could I have done differently?
Yes.
Where could I have improved? Like what did I miss out on?
Yeah, like for example, you'll see people recreate the board state and say, what would you do here and why, so that I can try to improve.
Yeah, I don't think that. So first of all, I do think that this is a great question by Nikolai. Like it's like you said, very thoughtful. When it comes to to people, we've all kind of been there so much. Like we all understand all those things. You get a good gauge on where your friend is at. Like, do they know all those things? Because if they don't, it actually can be useful. I found one of the best things Magic's ever done for me in life and everything. And I've used this example so many times, so bear with me, you know, once you realize if you do make, you know, the best play you could have made and a bad thing still happens, then you did the right thing and the bad thing happened. So be it. There's nothing. If you made the best decision you cannot have made a better decision. The bad thing is going to happen regardless. It's like if you get a flat tire, like just randomly, right? I'm not saying you chose to run over a pile of garbage in the alley because you were too lazy to get out of your car and move it. That was not making the best play. And if you get a flat tire there, well, yeah, you could have done something to prevent it. But if you're just driving on the street and all of a sudden your tire starts to go flat because there was a nail you couldn't see, it's not like you can, you know, just easily spot that. I'm not going to tell you that, like, oh yeah, you know, you next time, why don't you do X, Y, and Z? It's like, yeah, sometimes that just happens, and that's fine. Yeah, it's not like, basically once you kind of accept the things that happen in life, once you've done everything you can to make the best outcome possible, then you're going to be, I think, a lot happier, more at peace with what happens. If your friend's not there yet, you could talk to them about that. It's not an unreasonable, like, sort of a theme to talk about, because not everyone knows that. In fact, a lot of people don't. Yeah. There's a lot of people who you would expect to have kind of realized this about life, because this isn't unique to Magic players. Magic does bring it out of you very quickly because of just how Magic is. Like, Magic is full of make the best play, get punished, make the best play, lose, make the best play, whatever, you know, but but life is like that too, and you just maybe weren't thinking about it that way. So if your friend's not thinking about it that way, it's a huge level up opportunity. That said, read the room. Part of being friends is understanding your friends. There's some friends I know who, when they lose and come over, they want me to in depth break down what they could have done differently. Like, I'll watch my friend play at a PTQ or a Grand Prix. They lose the match. They're like, all right, well, what could I have done differently? And we'll spend 15 minutes talking about it. There's some friends who, if I started to do that, it would just drive them up the wall because they don't want to hear it. They lost. They want to complain about their loss. They want to sulk and get a hot dog and move on. And I'm there for that too. You know. Yeah. Sometimes I tell you guys, man, I wish I'd played a different deck. Duress was really good in this tournament. This Reanimator deck sucks. Cruelty of Gix wasn't the play. This is like almost verbatim a conversation I had with you guys while I was losing at the PT, where I 6-0'd limited and bricked and constructed, right? Yeah. And sometimes I just want to complain to you guys about how unlucky I am.
Right. And we just let you do it. Like, we're not here to say, well, Luis, you know, you're still a really good player, or you could have, you know.
It's like, I know that.
We let you go. We know that you're aware. Yeah. Yeah. You know, what I like to do, and if especially if it's the right friend where I think it can be really helpful, what I like to do is look to myself first. Like, after, you know, okay, you just took a loss, it stings, you need to let the dust settle on that. But then if your friend says, you know, man, I'm really struggling, like, what, you know, I lost again and I don't know what's going on or whatever. And my advice is always to look to yourself first, not that's the end of the story, but that's the starting point. And, like, you know, like using your flat tire car as an example, you know, I know a lot of people would say, oh, it's just bad luck, you know, whatever. Right. But I say, well, is there anything reasonable that I could have done to prevent that? For example, did I let my tires get super, super worn down where they're, like, very susceptible to things like that? Should I have changed these tires sooner? You know, do I know how much tread these things have I attended to my tires, which, by the way, are really important. Like, tires are extraordinarily important to the way that your car functions and the safety, performance, all of it. They're really, really important. And did you just say, I don't know, I didn't really pay attention and I just waited until one of them blew out? Well, that's a good point where you can say, I need to kind of be on top of this because there's safety concerns and all that kind of stuff too. If that isn't the case, oh no, I got these 2 months ago, you know, they're totally fine, no issue with that. Then I would say, do I have a spare tire or a way to make, you know, fix a flat, just something to give myself, you know, AAA, a backup plan in case I got this flat tire. And if it's like, yeah, you know, you got the spare, it's okay, you know, but you're just going to have to replace this tire. Then I say, that's it. I did the reasonable things that I could have done to prevent, you know, myself getting stuck on the side of the road with a flat tire, and it still happened anyway. That's fine. Like that's it. That's it, right? The thing you don't want to do is be the person who just says, I'm so unlucky. These bad things keep happening to me. You know, God doesn't like me. Why is the universe angry? Or, you know, what did I do to deserve this? That type of stuff, but doesn't realize that those tires are 4 years old and you drive all the time and you just never even bothered to figure if they're getting worn or should be replaced or whatever. And that because obviously, you know, what's going to happen. You're going to go get them replaced because now they've finally completely given out, and then you're going to do it again. Because in your mind, it was bad luck or the universe not liking you, and it wasn't anything that was under your control. When the truth is, you have some amount of control over it, but not full control, right? And when it comes to Magic, it's the same. Did I play around something in a reasonable way? Did I build my deck in a reasonable way that, you know, considered all of the things that I could at the time, the information that I had? You know, did I prepare myself for the tournament in the best way I could, both in terms of play testing and sideboarding and stuff, but also just, you know, did I get enough sleep? Am I feeling good about life and things right now that I can play in this tournament and feel good about it? Right. And all of those, you know, things that you actually have control over that do affect somewhat the outcome. Ultimately, though, yeah, it happens a lot that you could have made all of those decisions with the information you had and been reasonable and lost as well. And that's the step that you go past when you look at yourself, because it's not about blame. It's not about like, I could have done everything. I could have done something different in every scenario. You have to recognize the times when that's not the case, but you don't want to assume it because that could lead you to kind of complacency, I think. Let's do a few more, Luis, and we'll call it a show. Atapong says, hypothetically, what would make you quit Magic? I mean, there's obviously wild scenarios that we could come up with, but realistically, you know, like they designed the cards the way they design the cards right now. That's probably not going to have some sweeping change where like the game itself is different.
Yeah, I mean,
I feel like you're burnout proof at this point.
Pretty close. Like it, honestly, even if there was organized play basically disappeared, which I really hope it doesn't. I love it. Mm-hmm. But even if it did, I kind of feel like I would still just engage with the Cube Discord and Magic Online. If they made it so you couldn't play Magic Online and also there was no tournaments, like I guess we could end up in a spot where like how am I playing Magic? But like that's also pretty far-fetched.
Yeah.
I guess for me it would have to be like some other game that I would just get completely obsessed with.
Yeah. Something else comes. Yeah. Cause I can't. Yeah. I guess other life priorities could come up or something. I don't know. I just don't see the quitting part. My Magic has changed for me over time, and I think it will continue to, how I engage with it, what I care about and stuff. But I feel that if Wizards stopped printing Magic cards, it still wouldn't, like, we wouldn't stop playing.
Yeah, I don't think so.
Plus, honestly, if Wizards like dissolved and we couldn't play online, then I think you and I would just start a company to make
right
a way to do that so we could cube draft. Gregorado says, I started playing in 2021. I'm excited for Khans of Tarkir to come out on Arena later this year because I know it's many limited players' all-time favorite set. In playing an old format for the first time, what should I expect in terms of adjusting card evaluations for 9 years of power creep, like power toughness, for mana, quality of removal, etc.? It's not that different.
No, it's not really.
No, I don't think that you would. There would be no specific adjustment that you should make for that time period. I know it sounds like a long time, but limited was very much in its modern incarnation by then, and you're not going to, like, they could bring out Khans of Tarkir tomorrow, and nobody would be like, "What is this?" You know, it would totally hold up.
They would question why they decided to go with Treasure Cruise again, but
yeah, there's definitely some cards that they may not want to put in the set. But Evan says, "Hey, Marshall and Luis, read any good books lately? I hear you guys reference Blink a lot by Malcolm Gladwell, which I also enjoyed. Wondering if you have come across any other good books that have influenced you personally, shaped the way you look at the world, or even how you approach magic. Love the show and appreciate your perspectives on life. Cheers."
Well, I started reading Going Infinite by Michael Lewis about
that just came out a couple days ago, right?
About Mr. Samuel Bankman-Fried. So that's been something.
Michael Lewis, for those that don't know, is the author behind a bunch of books that have become like wildly successful movies, like Moneyball, The Blind Side, that kind of stuff. And he sort of serendipitously met Sam Bankman-Fried, who's now just started his trial, and found him interesting and said, I feel like something's going on with this guy. Can I come along for the ride? Which is just, I guess that's why he's Michael Lewis. Like, that's why he's so successful, is he just has that eye for this type of stuff. And so he spent 6 months with him, meeting on average at least once a week and picking his brain, and was there as the entire thing collapsed. I mean, it's just like one of the best stories that you could capture as a author. And I'm sure it'll become a movie and all that stuff too. And that book just came out. Is it good?
It's good. I think Michael Lewis is takes Sam at face value a little more than he should, as
I see
someone who did the same.
Yeah. And it is hard because of the, it affects us and our people around us personally. Right. So it's a different, it's not just like a salacious news story. Like, yeah, that was not good. I am reading, although slowly, a book by a woman named Mary Beard, who's a historian from England, and she specializes in Rome, ancient Rome. And she wrote kind of she's written a few books, but this is kind of her main one. It's called SQPR, and she's fantastic. She also does presenting on documentaries from England as well, from their public TV like BBC, and I think it's called Channel 4 or something. But anyway, she's
Channel 4 ball.
Sure. She's GOAT tier when it comes to that stuff, and I absolutely love it. All right, let's pick one more question here. There's a genius or grifter. Funny. We could do a simple one here. What's your fondest MTG memory?
My fondest MTG memory.
Yeah.
There's a lot to choose from. On the one hand, there's like the accomplishment part where it's like, I think getting into the Hall of Fame is the accomplishment I'm the proudest in. Like, you don't need to know a lot about Magic to know that being in the Hall of Fame is like a lifetime achievement award. A lot of people think you deserve to be there, right? It's hard to get into, very hard, and no one even gets in anymore because they've currently are doing that. But I think overall, the one that I really go back to the most and think of the most, it's not even one moment, honestly. It's just thinking of Team Channel Fireball and all the guys I got to spend so much of my life with, testing, hanging out, like trying to solve these different formats that, like, I mean, look, life's so impermanent, and like anything you do at work in 1 year, 2 years, sometimes even 2 weeks, kind of doesn't matter, right? Like, you don't think about that at the end of like when you're on your deathbed, no one ever wished they worked more, right? That sort of thing.
Right.
I think it's cool how much time and energy we spent trying to break a particular set of cards that existed 8 years ago, and for 3 weeks, that's all that we cared about. And then afterwards, sometimes, people still cared about it. Like, we talk about Cobblade and Elves and Eldrazi decks. Like, I did a panel in Vegas where we talked about Magic history, and people still, lots and lots of people remember those decks and those cards and all that. But I just think about the team and how much time we spent together, and I look back and it was just such a formative experience in my life. And I have such good relationships with those guys. Like, I'm still really close friends with basically all of them. There's some I've lost less, I'm not quite in as much touch with anymore, but it's just kind of incredible to me how much of a community there is. Like, it really struck me when at Vegas, and this has happened every Vegas, I go in, and how many of the people in that room have I known for over 10 years?
Yeah.
And
totally.
I mean, shout out to my friend Bruce, who taught me and my brothers how to play Magic and D&D 20 something years ago. And he was there, not actually for the convention, for a Raiders game, but we got to hang out and do some gambling and have some drinks together. And it was like, I don't know. My college roommate, Eirik, was there, who me and Cheon used to live with, and he came out to hang out with me and Cheon, and Magic did all that. And that's the part that paper Magic has to it that online Magic does not. And at the end of the day, that's I don't know. I'm sitting here on this podcast with you because we went on the Magic Cruise together and it was fun to hang out, right?
Yeah, totally.
Me, you, and TSG, the Three Musketeers.
Oh man, there's stories there. Yeah. For me, it's similar. It's not one specific memory. It's I've always been really careful to try to not take for granted the things that we get to do and the times that we have, because I don't know, especially when you do them for a while, my stuff in the booth and, or out in the world in some other country covering this game and doing this stuff. And it's like, that doesn't last forever, right? Like we don't get to just do this for our whole life. It's not guaranteed. And usually once you stop that kind of thing, that's kind of it. And you move on to a different chapter. And I've always really, really tried to be kind of in the moment when Paul and I sit down to do a draft, at the PT Friday morning. Like, it's just this very unique vibe and this special thing that, it's a major, major privilege to be able to be kind of the conduit, to the viewers to, of what we're doing. And it's, man, I just feel like so many people get to that spot and then just sort of assume that it's going to be like that. And then, you see this with professional athletes and stuff too. And then once it's gone, it's like, man, I'm not out there doing it anymore, right? You're not out there testing with the teams every other week, and that world's not coming back. You're going to be queued for the PT and you're going to get some of that experience, but it was a different time for us for sure. And so part of that has already changed, but I'm just trying to make sure that I, cause I'm content with all that stuff. Like, I don't need to hang on to it and keep doing this forever or whatever. But like, I don't want to look back and think like, that was actually kind of really special and cool. And I didn't really acknowledge it at the time, so it's those little moments that are the most cherished, I think. Thanks for all the great questions. We got to most of them, but we'll save a few of them. And if your question didn't get answered, I'll be putting up the new question of the week thread, and definitely feel free to put your question in there as well, so that we can get it, because it's simply a time issue. It's not about any of the questions specifically. So thank you once again, everybody on the Patreon, for A, supporting us, and B, if you put in a question, for asking it. We really appreciate it. We love answering your wild questions, and really thoughtful ones as well this time. I thought this really shows our listener base's true colors here, right? They're really a thoughtful bunch, and we really appreciate it. If you want to find us on social media, Marshall_LR and Luis's LSV, you can find us everything related to the podcast at lrcast.com, including every episode of the show that we've ever recorded, going all the way back. So if you want to listen to
except for the
Cons of Tarkir, except for, well, there's that one, but
the one.
Oh yeah, we all know. If you want to listen to the Cons of Tarkir set review, you can find it, right? It goes back like that. So we've been doing the show for a long time, and that archive is there for always. Anyway, thank you so much for hanging out with us, and we'll see you next week.
Short sign off today because my parents are here. I can hear them upstairs. They've arrived. But I wanted to give some huge shout outs. Number one, to Lord Tupperware, Ethan. He qualified for the Pro Tour. He qualified for both the Pro Tour and the Arena Champs by going 7-1 on day one and day two of the Arena Championship qualifier, and that is awesome.
Congratulations.
It could have happened to a nicer guy, because it's unlikely that Ethan is the nicest person because there's so many people in the world, but he's a very nice guy. So I do have to give him credit for that.
I think we're all glad that you qualified that. You couldn't say that he's just a nice guy.
I'm still getting to play your first Pro Tour is an experience I wish I could have again. And I'm really excited for Ethan to get a chance to do that. So I think it's really cool that he qualified, and it's well deserved. Like those guys know their stuff. Not quite enough to beat us in the showdown, but like they do know their stuff. Speaking of which, Showdown is coming this coming Tuesday, so tune in the evening. More info on Twitter if you want to find it exactly. The second is Alex Court of Calls. He almost qualified. He lost to actually Andrea Mengucci, playing for top 8 of the 100K, and that would have been a Pro Tour qualification as well. So was really pulling for him. I'm a huge fan of Alex, both as a player and a person. I think Alex is great, and because Ethan tweeted about it. Ben also won 2K, Mr. Metronome in the Arena Open. So, got to give him props too. We've got some good competition lined up. And I love when my friends win. Like, I love winning myself. And, Yeah, if we're being honest, I would choose for myself to win over my friends win most of the time, but it's not even always the case. Like sometimes you'd rather your friends win, like when they get to hit milestones or accomplishments that they've not hit before. And watching all these guys have such a good weekend was really cool. And still not rooting for them to beat us in the showdown, but I'm really glad that they've been killing it here in Wilds of Eldraine.